Grandma confesses I got pregnant at 61 years old. I shocked everyone. It all started with a simple leak in the kitchen and ended with my name in the headlines. No one understood how or why, and much less what was behind my decision to continue with that pregnancy. But now, years later, it's time to reveal what really happened and why not everyone survived the choices I made. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The constant dripping in the kitchen sink echoed through the house like a desperate clock. Eleanor dried her hands on her embroidered apron, the same one she had been using for 15 years, and sighed, looking at the ceiling stained by moisture. At 62 years old, she was tired of solving household problems alone that seemed to multiply with each season. The house in Maple Grove, an inheritance of 3 generations, groaned under the weight of years. The walls were peeling in some corners, the windows creaked with the wind, and now this stubborn leak that had started as an occasional drop had become a misbehaving faucet. Eleanor adjusted her grey hair tied in a low bun and picked up the phone, flipping through the yellowed telephone book looking for a plumber. Since Edward had passed away 4 years ago, victim of a sudden heart attack in the backyard where he cultivated his roses, Eleanor's routine had transformed into a predictable sequence of silent afternoons. Her children, all adults established in their own lives, appeared on Sundays for the traditional lunch, but during the week she shared her solitude only with Mozart, the Persian cat that Edward had brought as a gift on their last wedding anniversary. Robert, the oldest son, always insisted that she sell the house and move to a smaller, more practical apartment. "Mom, you don't need this whole mansion," he would say, adjusting his prescription glasses with the same impatient gesture he had inherited from his father. But Eleanor refused. Each room held fragments of a life built with love. The out-of-tune piano, where the grandchildren practiced their first melodies, the dining room, where they had celebrated their silver wedding anniversary, the garden where Edward spent hours talking to plants as if they were old friends. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her memories. Eleanor opened the door and found a man of medium height, around 50 years old, with calloused hands and a gentle smile. He wore a light blue shirt, impeccably clean despite his manual labor, and carried a toolbox that seemed well maintained. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Anthony, the plumber. You called about a leak?" His voice was calm, unhurried. Eleanor noticed that he waited to be invited before entering, not invading the space as some service providers did. There was an old-fashioned politeness about him, from a time when people still greeted each other on the street and asked permission before speaking. "Please come in. It's in the kitchen. It's been dripping non-stop for a week." Anthony followed Eleanor through the corridors of the house, and she noticed that he observed the details with respectful interest. The paintings on the wall, the crystal vase on the shelf, the family photographs lovingly arranged on the sideboard. It wasn't the invasive curiosity of someone assessing property, but the look of someone who recognizes the value of memories kept between walls. In the kitchen, he examined the problem with professional attention, testing the connections, checking the water pressure, making small sounds of approval as he identified the source of the leak. Eleanor prepared coffee on the stove, an automatic habit when receiving visitors, even if they were service calls. "The main pipe is fine, Mrs. Eleanor. It's just a seal that needs to be replaced. Simple thing, I'll fix it in half an hour." While he worked, Eleanor stayed nearby, initially as a precaution. Edward had always advised her not to leave strangers alone in the house, but gradually out of genuine curiosity. Anthony worked in concentrated silence, but occasionally made comments about the quality of the original installation, praising the care of whoever had built the house. "Did your husband do this installation? Well done work, you know. These days nobody has this patience with details anymore. It was my father-in-law, actually. He was very meticulous indeed. My husband followed his example in everything." Eleanor served coffee in porcelain cups, the same ones from her wedding trousseau, and Anthony accepted gratefully. They sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in months, she had company for breakfast. The conversation flowed naturally. He told her about his children who lived in other states. She commented about the grandchildren who always found Grandma's house more interesting than their own modern residences. "The house has personality," said Anthony, looking around. "These old houses have soul. You can feel the good energy." When he finished the job and prepared to leave, Eleanor felt a pang of melancholy. The house would return to silence, Mozart would resume his endless nap on the living room sofa, and she would spend the rest of the day reorganizing cabinets that were already organized just to occupy time. "How much do I owe you, Mr. Anthony?" $50, Mrs. Eleanor, and if you have any problem, feel free to call me. Sometimes these old installations give us surprises. He left his card with the phone number, and Eleanor put it in her apron pocket with more care than she would keep an important document. There was something about his presence that had brought light to the morning, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a long time. 3 days later, the laundry room faucet began to leak. Eleanor called Anthony almost hastily, like someone afraid the opportunity might slip through her fingers. He appeared the same day, with the same polite smile and the same willingness to accept a cup of coffee after work. This time the conversation extended for almost 2 hours. Anthony told her about the wife he had lost 2 years before, victim of a silent cancer that she had faced with admirable courage. Eleanor shared her own experiences of widowhood, the sleepless nights, the feeling of incompleteness that accompanies those who lose the companion of a lifetime. "The worst isn't the loneliness," reflected Eleanor, absently stirring the sugar in the already sweetened coffee. "It's the feeling that half of everything stopped making sense. Before, I cooked thinking about what he liked. Now, I make food for myself, and it lasts for 3 days." Anthony nodded with genuine understanding. "I know exactly what you mean. During the first few months, I would set 2 plates on the table out of habit. It took time to get used to the silence at mealtimes. When he left, Eleanor stood on the porch, watching him walk away down the tree-lined street. There was something comforting about his presence, a tranquility that she didn't know she had been missing. That night, for the first time in months, she slept without needing the chamomile tea that had become her nighttime companion. The following week, Anthony appeared again, this time without being called. He said he was passing by the street and decided to check if everything was okay with the previous repairs. Eleanor knew it was a pretext, and he probably knew that she knew, but they both pretended it was standard procedure for good customer service. Breakfast was repeated, now accompanied by cornbread that Eleanor had made especially, remembering that he had mentioned liking homemade sweets. The conversation flowed with increasing ease, covering everything from childhood memories to opinions about the neighborhood changes, which both had inhabited for decades. "Mrs. Eleanor, I hope you don't find me presumptuous, but I'd like to invite you for ice cream in the park on Sunday afternoon. It's been a while since I've had such pleasant company for a walk." Eleanor felt her face blush like a teenager. There was something childish and exciting about the proposal, as if she were rediscovering dormant sensations. She accepted with elegance, arranging to meet at the Riverside Park gazebo, where Edward used to take her to listen to Sunday concerts. That night, for the first time in 4 years, Eleanor opened the wardrobe with the expectation of finding something special to wear, something that would make her feel beautiful again. She chose a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, that Edward always complimented, and tried a pink lipstick she had impulsively bought months before. Sunday arrived sunny, and Eleanor walked to the park with lighter steps than usual. Anthony was waiting at the agreed place, wearing a light dress shirt and dark pants, clearly dressed for the occasion. He offered his arm with chivalry, and they walked together through the tree-lined paths, talking about the musicians performing, the children playing in the renovated playgrounds, the architectural changes they witnessed in the buildings around them. They had red berry ice cream sitting on Eleanor's favorite bench, the same one where she and Edward used to solve household problems on Sundays. Strangely, it wasn't painful to be there with another person. Anthony wasn't trying to take Edward's place. He didn't compete with the memories. He only offered a new and comforting companionship for the present. When they said goodbye late in the afternoon, both knew that something had changed between them. It was no longer just the courtesy between customer and service provider, nor even the solidarity between 2 widowers who understood each other mutually. There was a subtle, respectful attraction, built on the solid foundation of genuine affinity. Eleanor returned home with a lighter heart and a strange feeling of anticipation. It had been a long time since she had experienced the pleasant anxiety of having something to look forward to. While preparing dinner for one, she surprised herself whistling an old melody, something she hadn't done since the days when Edward hummed in the mornings while shaving. That night before sleeping, she looked long at Edward's photograph on the bedside table and whispered a silent request for understanding. She wasn't betraying memories, just allowing life to continue its natural course, like rivers that find new beds when they encounter obstacles. The following week brought a series of small hydraulic problems that needed Anthony's attention. A loose faucet, a stuck valve, a clogged drain. Eleanor knew she was inventing pretexts and discovered that she didn't mind her own lack of subtlety. At 62, she had learned that life is too short to waste opportunities for happiness because of social conventions. 2 months had passed since the first leak, and Eleanor's routine had completely transformed. The mornings were no longer an empty succession of household chores, but moments of careful preparation, fresh coffee, the table set with the best china, flowers picked from the garden for the kitchen vase. Anthony had become a constant presence in the house, always finding some small repair to justify his visit, always bringing some news to share during coffee. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed by the neighbors. Mrs. Carmen, who had lived in the house next door for 20 years, commented with discreet curiosity about the plumber who appeared at the widow's house with suspicious frequency. "Quite a coincidence, all these defects appearing at once," she murmured to her husband, peering through the kitchen window when Anthony arrived with his toolbox and his gentle smile. Eleanor didn't care about the veiled comments. For the first time since Edward's departure, she felt truly alive. Anthony had the gift of making her laugh with stories of professional daily life, curious cases of eccentric clients, amusing observations about human nature that he discovered in his wanderings through American homes. He was a cultured man despite his simple education, an avid reader of biographies and novels, an appreciator of popular music, and knowledgeable about the urban transformations of the city they both loved. The visits extended increasingly. Anthony started bringing unnecessary tools just to have a reason to come back the next day to retrieve them. Eleanor began preparing more elaborate lunches, always with the excuse that there was too much food, and it would be wasteful to eat alone. Gradually, the meetings became dates, the coffees transformed into long conversations about abandoned dreams and possible plans. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said one afternoon, after fixing a valve that was working perfectly, "I know it might seem presumptuous on my part, but I would very much like to take you to dinner at a decent restaurant. It's been a long time since I've had the pleasure of such special company in a special place." Eleanor felt her heart race, like a young woman receiving her first romantic invitation. She accepted with elegance, arranging for the following Saturday. That night she called the hairdresser she hadn't visited in months, scheduled a manicure, rummaged through the wardrobe looking for the perfect dress for the occasion. There was something liberating about getting ready for someone again, in feeling desired and desiring. Dinner was at the Italian restaurant downtown, a cozy environment with candles on the table and soft music in the background. Anthony proved charming company, telling stories of youth, sharing opinions about books they had both read, making plans for visits to museums and exhibitions that Eleanor hadn't frequented in years. When he held her hand over the table, she didn't withdraw, just felt a wave of heat rise up her arm and spread through her body like a reminder of long-forgotten sensations. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name without the formal treatment for the first time, "I want you to know that my intention is sincere. I'm not looking for adventure or convenience. I'm looking for companionship, affection, the possibility of building something good with someone who's worth it." They walked along Bayshore Beach after dinner, holding hands like a couple of sweethearts, talking about the beauty of the sea under the moonlight and making plans for future outings. When Anthony left her at home, he delicately kissed her forehead, a gesture that contained more tenderness than many passionate kisses she had received in her youth. That dawn, Eleanor couldn't sleep. It wasn't bad anxiety, but the euphoria of someone rediscovering the ability to feel butterflies in the stomach. She got up several times to look at herself in the mirror, trying to see herself through Anthony's eyes, recognizing in the mature woman a beauty different from youth, more serene and profound. The relationship evolved naturally. Anthony started showing up on Saturdays for lunch, on Sundays to help in the garden, on Thursdays to watch the soap operas that Eleanor religiously followed. He brought plant seedlings for the yard, fixed the front door lock that jammed in humid weather, painted the porch railing that was peeling. These weren't just courtship gestures, but genuine care from someone who was becoming attached to the place and the person. It was Robert who noticed first. He arrived for the traditional Sunday lunch and found an unknown man helping his mother serve dessert, treating her with excessive familiarity for his conception of appropriate relationships for 60-year-old widows. "Mom, can I talk to you for a minute in private?" Eleanor accompanied her son to the living room, sensing the storm that was approaching. Robert, a successful and naturally conservative lawyer, didn't disguise the disapproval on his serious face and furrowed eyebrows. "What is this, Mom? What's this story about receiving a strange man in our house as if he were family?" "Anthony isn't a strange man, Robert. He's my friend and he's becoming very special to me. I think you should respect him, since he treats me with all affection and consideration." "Friend? Mom, for God's sake, you're 62 years old. What kind of friendship is this? And what does this man want from you, after all? Certainly not your beautiful eyes." The phrase hurt Eleanor like a slap. It wasn't just the rudeness, but the cruel implication that she, at her age, couldn't be desired for her personal qualities, only for material interest. Robert continued the attack, questioning Anthony's intentions, suggesting that men of lower social class always have ulterior motives when approaching propertied widows. "You don't know this man, Mom. You don't know where he comes from, what kind of life he leads, if he has debts, vices, hidden family. You're being naive, putting our family inheritance at risk." "Our inheritance?" Eleanor repeated the phrase with growing indignation. "Robert, this house is mine, built with the sweat of your father and your grandfather. As long as I'm alive and lucid, I'll do with it and myself whatever I think is best. And if you're worried about inheritance, maybe you should worry more about my happiness in the present." The discussion escalated when Robert threatened to investigate Anthony, hire a private detective to discover his true intentions. Eleanor completely lost patience, something rare in her naturally sweet personality, and asked her son to leave her house until he learned to respect her choices. The following weeks brought a family Cold War. Robert convinced his siblings, Michael and Sandra, that their mother was being manipulated by an opportunist. The three organized an intervention, appearing together on a Thursday night when they knew Anthony would be present. The confrontation was painful and embarrassing. The three children surrounded Anthony in the living room, bombarding him with aggressive questions about his intentions, his financial situation, his plans regarding their mother. Anthony maintained admirable calm, responding with dignity to each provocation, but Eleanor saw the embarrassment in his eyes, the humiliation of being treated like a suspect in a family court. "You're being disrespectful to an honorable man who has only brought me joy," said Eleanor, placing herself between Anthony and her children. "If you can't accept my happiness, then you're not welcome in my house while you persist in this attitude." Sandra, the only daughter, tried a more emotional approach. "Mom, understand our concern. You've always been a sensible woman, and suddenly this relationship appears. It seems like you're not the mother we know." "You're right, Sandra. I'm no longer the mother you know. I'm a woman who has rediscovered the ability to be happy, to feel loved and to love again. If that bothers you, the problem is yours, not mine." Anthony said goodbye politely, but Eleanor noticed that something had broken in him. In the following days, his visits became more spaced out, more formal. He still came when she called reporting household problems, but he didn't stay for coffee, didn't accept invitations for lunch, maintained a professional distance that broke her heart. "Anthony," said Eleanor one morning, holding his hand when he was preparing to leave after fixing a faucet that didn't need fixing, "don't let my children destroy what we're building. They'll get used to it. They'll understand with time. Eleanor, I don't want to be a cause of discord in your family. You love your children, they love you. I can't be responsible for separating you." "You're not separating anyone. They're choosing to separate from me by not accepting my happiness. Please don't give up on us because of them." But Eleanor felt she was losing Anthony to the weight of family pressure. He was a good man, couldn't bear the idea of being considered an intruder or opportunist. Personal dignity was one of the traits that most attracted her to him. But now that same dignity was pulling him away from her. It was in this moment of greatest emotional vulnerability, torn between nascent love and family pressure, dealing with the possibility of losing the second chance at happiness that life had offered her, that Eleanor began to feel the first strange symptoms: morning sickness, unexplained dizziness, a fatigue different from the usual. At first, Eleanor attributed the symptoms to the emotional stress of the family situation. The morning sickness that made her run to the bathroom even before having coffee seemed a natural consequence of the anguish of seeing her relationship with Anthony falling apart under the pressure from her children. The dizziness that afflicted her without warning could be the result of sleepless nights, spent tossing in bed while seeking solutions to the impasse that had settled in her life. But when her menstruation, which had already been irregular due to age, completely stopped, an absurd suspicion began to form in her mind. At 62 years old, after decades without worrying about contraceptive methods, the possibility seemed not only unlikely, but scientifically impossible. Even so, on a Thursday morning, while Anthony was fixing a lock that didn't need fixing, Eleanor hid in the bathroom and did something she hadn't done in more than 30 years, a pregnancy test. The 2 pink lines that appeared on the plastic display seemed like an error of the universe, a cruel joke of fate, or a product defect. Eleanor repeated the test 3 times, using different brands bought at different pharmacies, always getting the same impossible result. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, holding the last test in trembling hands, trying to process information that defied everything she knew about biology and about herself. When Anthony knocked on the bathroom door, concerned about her delay, Eleanor quickly put the tests in the drawer of the cabinet and came out trying to disguise the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. She spent the rest of the day in a fog of disbelief, watching Anthony work in the garden, pruning the rose bushes that Edward had planted, and wondering how to tell him something that she herself still couldn't accept as real. That night, after Anthony left with his polite kiss on the forehead, Eleanor called Dr. Mitchell's office, the gynecologist who had been following her for years. She scheduled an appointment for the next day, inventing an excuse about routine exams, but knowing she needed medical confirmation for something her reason categorically rejected. The consultation proceeded like a surreal nightmare. Dr. Mitchell, a 50-year-old man accustomed to medical surprises, turned pale when Eleanor reported the symptoms and mentioned the possibility that was tormenting her. The clinical examination revealed signs compatible with early pregnancy, but the doctor insisted on a complete battery of laboratory tests and ultrasound before confirming something he considered almost impossible. "Mrs. Eleanor, I need to be honest with you. A pregnancy at your age is extremely rare and presents considerable risks for both the mother and the baby. If it is really confirmed, we will need very rigorous monitoring and serious discussions about the available options." Eleanor left the office on an emotional roller coaster. Part of her hoped the tests would contradict the home tests, that it would all be a false alarm caused by stress. Another part, increasingly stronger, was beginning to get used to the revolutionary idea that she could be generating life at 62, that Anthony and she had created something impossible and miraculous during their afternoons of amorous rediscovery. The results came a week later, confirming the unbelievable. Eleanor was 6 weeks pregnant. Dr. Mitchell received her in the office with a grave expression, surrounded by medical books and studies on similar cases he had managed to find in the world medical literature. "Mrs. Eleanor, there are only a few dozen documented cases of natural pregnancy in this age group. It's an extremely rare phenomenon, but not impossible. However, I need to alert you about the significant risks: possibility of spontaneous abortion, cardiovascular complications, gestational diabetes, chromosomal problems in the fetus." Eleanor heard every word as if she was submerged in water, everything arriving muffled and distant. When the doctor asked about her intentions regarding the pregnancy, she answered with a firmness that surprised her. "Doctor, I will carry this pregnancy to term. I don't know how, I don't know why it happened, but I know I want this baby." The news about Eleanor's pregnancy spread quickly through the city's medical circles. Dr. Mitchell, respecting medical confidentiality, did not disclose the patient's name, but the case itself became the subject of seminars and academic discussions. Journalists specializing in health began to investigate, trying to identify the woman behind the pregnancy that defied medical textbooks. Eleanor knew she wouldn't be able to keep the secret for long, especially with the already troubled relationship with her children. She decided to tell Anthony first, who deserved to know he would be a father at 52 years of age, in a situation that not even his most ambitious dreams had imagined. She prepared a special dinner on a Friday, using the best china, lighting candles, creating an intimate atmosphere for a conversation that would definitely change the course of their lives. Anthony arrived punctually, as always, but Eleanor noticed that he maintained the emotional distance he had adopted since the confrontation with her children. "Anthony," she began after they finished the main course, "I need to tell you something that will seem impossible, but I swear on Edward's memory that it's absolutely true." He looked at her attentively, sensing the importance of the moment. Eleanor took a deep breath and said the words that would sound absurd in any context. "I'm pregnant. With your child. At 62 years old, I'm expecting our child." The silence that followed was deafening. Anthony fixed his eyes on her as if trying to decipher a foreign language, processing information that defied his understanding of reality. After long minutes, he slowly shook his head, as if awakening from a confusing dream. "Eleanor, is that possible? Are you sure?" She showed the tests, explained the symptoms, reported the conversation with the doctor. She saw Anthony go through all the phases of shock, denial, disbelief, fear, and finally a growing joy that illuminated his face like the rising sun. "We're going to be parents," he said, rising from his chair and embracing Eleanor carefully, as if she were made of crystal. "At 52 and 62 years old, we're going to be first-time parents." They laughed together at the wonderful absurdity of the situation, cried with emotion, made impossible plans for a future that neither had imagined. Anthony proposed marriage right there, in the candlelit kitchen, promising to care for her and the baby with all the love he could gather. But the joy of the moment was tempered by the awareness of the challenges that awaited them. Eleanor's children, who already opposed the relationship, would certainly react with horror to the news of the pregnancy. The social class difference between them, which Robert always emphasized, would be amplified by the unusual situation, and there were the real medical risks that Dr. Mitchell had explained with frightening scientific details. "Eleanor," said Anthony, holding her hands across the table, "I know it won't be easy. Your children will give us trouble. People will talk. Doctors will scare us with statistics. But I want to face all of this by your side. I want to marry you. I want to take care of our child. I want to build a family with you." They married 3 weeks later, in a discreet civil ceremony at the Maple Grove courthouse, with only 2 unknown witnesses that the clerk arranged. Eleanor wore a light blue dress, simple but elegant, and Anthony wore the best suit he could buy for the occasion. They exchanged simple gold rings, promising love and mutual care for the years they had left. The honeymoon was a night at the Bayshore Palace Hotel, a gift Anthony gave to himself and his wife, using all the savings he had kept during years of honest work. Lying on the king-size bed, looking at the sea through the panoramic window, they talked about names for the baby, about how to adapt the house to receive a child, about what it would be like to raise a child when most people their age were taking care of grandchildren. "Do you think our baby will call us Grandpa and Grandma?" joked Eleanor, caressing her still flat belly. "Or will he get confused and think we're grandparents who adopted a child?" "It doesn't matter what he calls us," replied Anthony, kissing her neck tenderly. "What matters is that he calls us Daddy and Mommy, and that he feels loved every day of his life." When they returned home on Sunday night, they found Robert waiting at the door with an unfriendly face and a stack of documents in hand. He had discovered about the marriage through an acquaintance who worked at the courthouse, and had come prepared for what he considered a legal war for his mother's mental lucidity. "Mum, I need to talk to you seriously. This marriage was a mistake, and we can still annul it if we prove there was coercion or that you weren't in your full mental faculties." Eleanor looked at her son with a mixture of sadness and determination. It was time to take a definitive position, to choose between family approval and her own happiness. And she already knew what her choice would be, especially now that she carried in her womb the physical proof of the love she had found in the second half of life. Eleanor confronted Robert with a courage she didn't know she possessed. There at the door of her own house, holding Anthony's hand, she communicated to her firstborn son that she was pregnant and that she would carry the pregnancy to term, come what may. Robert's reaction was even worse than she had imagined. He shouted about senile dementia, threatened judicial interdiction, said that his mother had completely lost her mind and that it was his duty as a son to protect her from her own senseless decisions. "You don't understand, Mom. A woman your age can't have children. It's biologically impossible. This man is manipulating you, putting crazy ideas in your head." "Robert," said Eleanor with surprising firmness, "I have medical tests proving the pregnancy. I was monitored by Dr. Mitchell, whom you know and trust. I'm not crazy. I'm not being manipulated. I'm experiencing a miracle I didn't expect, but that I accept with gratitude." The weeks that followed were the most difficult in Eleanor's life. Robert hired a lawyer specializing in civil incapacity, and tried to file a lawsuit questioning his mother's mental lucidity. Sandra and Michael, initially undecided, ended up aligning with their older brother, convinced that the situation was out of control. The three organized a family campaign to convince Eleanor to undo the marriage and terminate the pregnancy. Anthony proved to be an extraordinary companion during this family storm. He didn't allow himself to be shaken by the accusations and pressures, maintained calm in the face of provocations, dedicated himself entirely to caring for Eleanor and the pregnancy. He renovated the room that would be the baby's, painting the walls a soft yellow and building with his own hands a solid wood crib that would be a work of art and a symbol of paternal love. The pregnancy continued under rigorous medical monitoring. Dr. Mitchell assembled a multidisciplinary team to monitor every aspect of the exceptional pregnancy. Eleanor had weekly exams, followed a specific diet, took special vitamins, rested more hours than she would like. Anthony accompanied her to all appointments, religiously noted the medical guidelines, transformed himself into a dedicated nurse and loving husband. In the 5th month of pregnancy, when it was impossible to hide the growing belly, the story leaked to the press. An investigative journalist managed to identify Eleanor and published a sensationalist report about the pregnant grandma who defied medical science. The house was surrounded by reporters, photographers, curious people who wanted to see the phenomenon up close. Eleanor found herself a prisoner in her own residence, unable to go out for a walk without being harassed by indiscreet questions. The media exposure brought unexpected consequences. Letters arrived from women across the country, relating their own stories of late maturation, of second marriages in old age, of challenges overcome when they seemed impossible. Eleanor discovered that she had become an involuntary symbol of the female capacity to start over, to surprise, to defy social conventions, even in advanced maturity. But fierce criticism also came. Conservative groups attacked her for setting a bad example for young women. Doctors publicly questioned the ethics of carrying such a risky pregnancy. Television commentators made cruel jokes about old ladies who think they're teenagers. Eleanor learned not to read newspapers or watch television programs, concentrating only on the well-being of the baby that was growing healthy in her womb. Robert intensified the legal attacks, now with support from conservative public opinion that considered the pregnancy a medical and social absurdity. He obtained a judicial injunction requiring psychiatric evaluation of Eleanor, forcing her to submit to mental capacity tests that she considered humiliating but necessary to prove her sanity. The psychiatric evaluation, conducted by a panel of 3 specialists, concluded that Eleanor was in perfect mental condition, making conscious decisions about her life and demonstrating emotional maturity adequate to face the challenges of late pregnancy. The psychiatric report was decisive in defeating the interdiction attempts, but it didn't reduce the family and social pressure. In the 7th month of pregnancy, Anthony began to show worrying symptoms. He coughed with increasing frequency, tired easily during simple activities, lost weight despite normal appetite. Eleanor insisted that he seek medical attention, but he minimized the symptoms, claiming it was just stress due to the complicated situation they were living. When he finally agreed to take tests, the diagnosis came like lightning on a clear day. Complicated pneumonia that had evolved into a serious infectious condition. Anthony was immediately hospitalized, leaving Eleanor alone at home for the first time since the beginning of the pregnancy. She spent days at the hospital, accompanying her husband who was fighting against the infection, while feeling the baby moving more and more intensely in her belly. "Eleanor," said Anthony, in one of the last lucid conversations they had, holding her hand in the hospital bed, "if something happens to me, promise you'll take care of our baby. Promise you'll give all the love that I won't be able to give." "Don't talk like that," she replied with tears in her eyes. "You're going to recover. We're going to raise our child together. We'll see him grow up, graduate, have his own children." But Anthony departed on a cold August dawn 3 weeks before the baby's birth. Eleanor was sleeping in a chair beside the bed when he sighed for the last time, as if he were simply too tired to continue breathing. She awoke with the sudden silence of the machines, with the sudden absence of the sound of breathing that had become the soundtrack of her nights in the hospital. The pain of loss was almost unbearable, but Eleanor had no time for complete mourning. The baby reacted to the mother's emotional stress and decided to be born 2 weeks earlier than expected. The contractions began on the day of Anthony's funeral, forcing Eleanor to go straight from the cemetery to the maternity ward, in a simultaneous tragedy and miracle that seemed like a soap opera script. Mary Claire was born on a September morning, weighing 5.5 pounds, crying with surprising strength for her small size. Eleanor received her in her arms with a mixture of joy and sadness she had never experienced before. Joy for the arrival of her healthy daughter. Sadness because Anthony wasn't there to meet her. The girl had her father's clear eyes and her mother's high forehead, a genetic combination that seemed like a love project, destined to perpetuate the memory of the one who had departed. Eleanor's children, moved by Anthony's loss and surprised by the mother's resistance during childbirth, reappeared at the hospital with flowers and apologies. Robert especially seemed ashamed of his previous attitude, recognizing that his mother had faced challenges he had never imagined possible. "Mom, I know I was too hard on you. I didn't understand. I couldn't accept. But seeing you now with the baby in your arms, I realized that maybe it was me who lost my mind, not you." Eleanor forgave them with the generosity of someone who has no time to hold grudges. She needed all available energy to care for Mary Claire, who proved to be a happy and healthy baby, despite the dramatic circumstances of her arrival in the world. The children organized themselves to help. Sandra took care of diaper and medication purchases. Michael hired a nurse for the first few months. Robert took care of the legal aspects of the inheritance that Anthony had left for his daughter. The house in Maple Grove gained new life with the baby's presence. The piano was tuned so that Mary Claire would grow up hearing classical music. The garden was replanted with colorful flowers to stimulate her vision. The rooms were reorganized to facilitate nighttime care. Eleanor discovered that being a mother at 63 had unexpected advantages, greater patience than in youth, accumulated wisdom about what really matters in raising a child, total availability of time and attention. Mary Claire grew up surrounded by love and stories. Eleanor told about the father she hadn't known, showed photographs of Anthony working in the garden, read aloud the notebooks where he noted thoughts about the fatherhood he would experience for such a short time. The girl learned from an early age that she had a special origin, that she was the fruit of an improbable love that defied conventions and possibilities. At 5 years old, Mary Claire already knew how to explain to school classmates that her mother was different from others because she had more life experience, more stories to tell, more wisdom to teach. She wasn't ashamed of the age difference. On the contrary, she felt proud to have a mother who had been brave enough to love again and generate life when everyone thought it was too late. The girl grew up creative and determined, with a precocious talent for drawing and woodworking, skills that seemed a genetic inheritance from the father who had built with his own hands the crib where she slept her first years. Eleanor encouraged these talents, transforming the garage into a workshop where Mary Claire could experiment with wood, nails, and imagination. Robert, who had become the most present uncle, used to say that his youngest niece was living proof that miracles still happen, even when science says they're impossible. The other grandchildren, initially confused by an aunt only a few years older than them, ended up transforming into protective older siblings, teaching Mary Claire how to ride a bicycle, fly a kite, navigate the mysteries of urban American childhood. When Mary Claire turned 10, Eleanor organized a party that brought together 3 generations of the family in the Maple Grove house. Looking around the table full of children, grandchildren, and the youngest daughter who ran through the garden where Anthony had planted rose bushes, Eleanor understood that she had lived several lives in one: the young wife and mother of the 1970s, the lonely widow of the early 2000s, the woman in love who rediscovered love in the third age, and finally the mature mother who raised a daughter with the wisdom of someone who had already made mistakes and learned lessons. Mary Claire ran to her mother's lap at the end of the party, tired from so much play, and whispered in Eleanor's ear, "Mom, do you think Daddy is watching our party from heaven?" "I'm sure, my daughter, and I think he's proud of the brave woman you're becoming." That night, after everyone had left and Mary Claire fell asleep hugging the sketchbook that had belonged to Anthony, Eleanor sat on the porch looking at the garden illuminated by the moon. At 73, with a 10-year-old daughter, she knew she had defied all statistics, broken all rules, surprised herself with the ability to start over when it seemed that all beginnings had already passed. Life had taught her that love has no age, that miracles happen when we least expect them. and that the courage to follow one's heart can generate impossible and wonderful consequences. Mary Claire was living proof that it's never too late to write a new chapter, even when everyone around insists that the book should have already reached its end. The end of the story. Dear listeners, the journey of Eleanor and her little Mary Claire teaches us that true love knows no age limits, and that the most beautiful miracles are born when we have the courage to defy the impossible. This story of new beginnings and hope is part of our special collection of narratives that celebrate the strength of the human heart. If this story touched you as much as it moved us in telling it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like to help us reach more people with these stories of love and overcoming. Share with someone who needs to believe it's never too late for a new beginning. In the comments, tell your own stories of new beginnings. Each of you has a unique and precious narrative to share. We'll be back tomorrow with a new story that will warm your hearts. Until then, remember, love always finds a way.